And to continue on that journey right now, it's my privilege to introduce our next speaker. Speaking of driving cross-sector collaboration in digital and innovation. Now, as companies digitize, often using similar technologies, innovation can be engendered by applying practices from one industry and then applying it to another. For example, payments are increasingly moving online across all industries. Companies increasingly seek innovative, frictionless, and convenient payment methods to boost sales and increase operational efficiencies. This presentation will focus on digital innovation and how it can be driven by cross-sector collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Innovation and Customer Solutions Asia Pacific, please welcome from Mastercard, representing Innovation and Customer Solutions Asia Pacific. This is Tobias Puehse.
Well, good to see everyone in person. I feel like I've been doing Zoom calls probably for about 2 years' time, so hopefully I can actually speak to you in person today. I came to give you a little bit of a backdrop curtain, and if you can pull up some of the slides, that would be great, of kind of how we think about innovation going forward. And we have looked at accelerating the future of commerce for many, many years now. And we started a new group within Mastercard called the Foundry. The Foundry is the place where we forge all of our new ideas. So let me skip forward. I don't know if this... Okay, perfect. Now, when we look at the future, it's actually something that happens often very slowly and then all at once. Right? And I think we all have experienced it, where I think in the previous panel, we just talked about how remote working we prepared for in many ways for long term, but then suddenly it happened and we had to quickly activate it. And that's actually the same way that we think about payment innovation right now. We look at things like cryptocurrencies. We look at things like new Web 3.0 applications in terms of distributed data, ledgers. When we look at advanced networking technology like 5G, how do all of these ultimately kind of factor in the way that we all interact with each other and how they actually bring technology to life? So we convert a lot of these market signals and technologies into opportunities. And actually this chart is about de-risking. And that's, I think, the key message that we think about in our organization. Like, what is the role of the Foundry? What's the role of the product organization? Is actually to de-risk the future. It's an interesting slide because it actually doesn't talk about the customer as the center. But the way I think we look at it is that ultimately it's actually the customer who will look at all of these technology and evaluate how do they interact with their current systems, how will their end users ultimately pick up these technologies. So we look at the trends of technology as ingredients to creating new possibilities. And so you look at all of the pieces like cloud and IoT and security. We then put that into portfolios that ultimately generate our new product innovation within Mastercard. So a couple of examples that we have that we'll talk about are things like carbon calculator. So transactional data itself is actually quite relevant. It's something that obviously we all know from our own banking applications, our credit card bills. But we now have actually turned that into the ability to also look into not just how well you're doing from a personal financial management, but actually how much carbon footprint each of your individual transactions have. So start a new conversation, start in a different way with a customer. So let me take you back into how we look at the different elements of the Mastercard ecosystem and how we just structure our technology journey in innovation. The first piece is really about growing, having a growth operating system mindset, and how you structure teams around that. Use strategic insights as a way to power your innovation. Ultimately drive the product development and then have a number of customer engagements to bring to market. And I think many of you in the room here too operate as B2B businesses like Mastercard. So I think the last 2 points are actually incredibly important because we often aspire to be like the B2C companies, right? The ones that actually directly own the customer and they're the ones who drive a lot of the change. But actually, ecosystem building is in many ways just as important in a B2B context to make sure that everyone comes along and that we can elevate the overall performance of technology. So let me talk about a little bit of our growth operating system. The way that we structure ourselves is around communities. So we have product guilds, people that essentially have a community of practice. And I think historically you may have thought of this as kind of working groups or different names for different things. But it's really about dedicating a group of people across a multidiscipline to talk about cybersecurity, to talk about IoT devices, to talk about cryptocurrencies, and then strengthen that talent pool. And we always talk about T individuals, that organizations need more T individuals, people that can go very deep on a specific subject, but have the ability to have a broad breadth of knowledge and can communicate their ideas well. We actually link that increasingly with customer experience design. And I think when we talked about security, I like the ransom piece. Mastercard, for example, has created these capabilities within our organization. We get scores every month about how well we have identified ransom attack that came in by email, as an example. So it's really about the experience, not just the capability that we're looking at and bringing the pieces together. Ultimately, we want people to experiment across the organization because innovation never happens in isolation or in a room with a bunch of individuals. So we have sandboxes, which is our always-on innovation platforms where everyone in the organization can participate, can provide their talents, especially in this new digital environment, where we no longer have to be fully reliant on being everybody in a room in front of a whiteboard. So in many ways, actually, remote working, which many people have kind of said is stifling innovation, is actually also increasing and creating new opportunities of innovation because the participation levels can be very different than what you may have seen in pre-COVID times as well. Now, the ways of working, I think, is pretty familiar with most of people in product development. We frame the problem, we create concepts, we create prototypes, ultimately bring it to a market test with our customers, commercialize and enhance. But the way that I think we go about it is that we have a studio framework. So we looked at our innovation processes to say, like, let's treat things as productions. And that's why we call it studios. It's a global framework that ultimately takes you through these different stages with very defined KPIs that the team can align on. Product councils are multidisciplined teams that basically come together and give input and judgment around whether or not ideas should progress. That really eliminates bias in the organization because councils are quite important. They actually are incentivized to question. But it ultimately helps the organization to eliminate ideas that may not have merit, but also have and introduce new questions and dialogue into the system in a more frequented way, which often doesn't happen if you have a project team that is really just incentivized to progress ideas and get them to market without questions. Portfolio management is a way for us to de-risk. I think de-risking is a big theme. A portfolio manager is responsible for a portfolio, but think about these as product hedge fund managers. So they have some ideas that may really explode and become really big, some ideas that are completely bad. And I think it's really the ability to actually be awarded for the performance of the portfolio. So it's no longer a bad thing in the organization to have one or two products that failed completely, as long as you have had a strong portfolio in your stewardship. And then power up is really the integration back in an organization. So this is a really important aspect to us as well, that we don't innovate in isolation of the business, but actually connect everything to individual business units and power them up essentially with new capabilities and thinking. When we look at insights are really critical and I think are key, sometimes a bit overlooked or it's brushed over. I love thinking about customers, I love thinking about technologies, But when we think about insights, and I recently read an article in the Singapore press around 5G, and it was payment related. And somebody wrote something like, it's going to be a fridge that can order your beverages like whenever you need it, and all of those things. And I'm like, but that has nothing to do with 5G, quite frankly. 5G is an outdoor technology. Inside would be Wi-Fi 6, right? And so we're not going to take your fridge on the balcony and put a 5G chip. So it's back to actually really demonstrating to an organization, say, like, we have so many buzzwords out there, but actually doing the work and the research to actually say, like, when is 5G actually relevant? It's actually relevant for toll gates. It's relevant for outdoor experiences like stadiums. It's relevant for transit, right? Whenever people are kind of in motion. But it's probably not that relevant for your smart washing machine or your fridge. And so you need to really focus on developing deeper insights around what technologies actually deliver and drive that as your differentiation, which is just talking about fun stuff, right? That could happen, but actually in reality will never happen. So if anybody will have a 5G connected fridge one day, you can please send me an email, because the chip technology will be way too expensive for them to incorporate and will not serve any purpose. So that's the way that we look at all of these new technologies. So surprisingly, maybe to some, but we have a quantum computing team. Why? Because cryptography is really important for payments, and we need to protect ourselves from attacks. So we already are future-proofing our network to be able to withstand quantum computing attacks, trying to break our encryption keys. And so we're ultimately building stronger encryption, stronger security technology around that. I mentioned 5G and IoT. For us, it's really about the migration of what we often have seen in commerce, being terminal, fixed, static devices, being actually now pulled into more software-based capabilities. And that's a transformation that is often overlooked. But merchants and commerce activities are increasingly digital. I mean, you know it from your own activities, buying things online. But also thinking about how you pay for your Grab, right? It's starting to be an online purchase. But now increasingly you go to a restaurant and start scanning a QR code and actually order from a website. It's again becoming an online purchase. So this idea of actually physical payment terminals, physical infrastructure is actually increasingly being replaced through these connectivities of 5G, IoT, and software-based capabilities. So it's quite an exciting time in the technology side, but we will see a lot of transformation, a lot of convergence in payments over the next few years. So when we look at portfolio solutions, again, this is the way that we de-risk different aspects of our business. We look at commercial, customer innovation, data and services, strategic growth, which is mostly around government solutions and inclusive technology for financial inclusion, and new payment products. But some of the examples of kind of like what our teams are working on that I mentioned already, they're quite fun. Like, so carbon calculator we addressed with the ability to actually understand what is your footprint. And this is really a reaction to market demand, where customers really looking to say, like, I want to understand what's my carbon footprint from all the spend I have. Click to pay in Cloud POS is a little bit touching on what we just talked about, where we see tremendous transformation potential and business opportunity by moving away from hardware-based services to software-based services in the merchant space. And that's where you see a lot of commerce activity and a lot of fintech activity as well. Now, digital ID is actually a convergent topic here as well, because ultimately, I have a prediction that applications will disappear from your phone or from your IoT device within the next 4 or 5 years. And it seems a bit strange to think about that, right? Because like we're also used to apps. But why were apps actually invented in the first place? They overcame a data problem. I was not able to have an iPhone and download all of my application and games and then go outside with my 3G connectivity. It just didn't work, right? So when we think about Web 3.0, that connectivity problem will go away with 5G, Wi-Fi. So what will happen to apps? Apps will become streaming applications. They will no longer become static installation-based. So we'll start coming back to old people like myself, go back to the world of the Web 1.0, where it was websites that were just interlinked and they flew dynamically through the ecosystem. And I think that dynamicism will come back. But that will create new cybersecurity elements and digital identity requirements, which are super interesting. Because once you start actually streaming applications, you need to have a very strong digital identity program and capability to identify the user, potentially link it to certain utilities that the user has, profile, preferences, payments, that then can basically be proliferated across all these streaming services without what is today an application-based economy where you register, onboard all your information, and keep it there forever and ever. So my big prediction, really, but it's really an example of how we're thinking ahead to say, like, digital identity, especially in a Web 3.0 ecosystem, will be incredibly important to manage and secure. Then provenance is the same for items. So a really exciting area for us is to say, like, it's not just people that have identities, but things, your car, your fridge, etc., all the different IoT devices that move around, but also the goods and services that are moved around the world. How do we ultimately link that? Because when we think about smart contracts, when we think about supply chain automation, we need to think about track and trace provenance. And then track and trace provenance becomes then the trigger for payment and value exchange throughout the ecosystem. So really fantastic and new areas to look after. And maybe the last one to pick up on is another acronym that many of you may not know or may know, central bank digital currency. Right, so that's something that is going to be quite a game changer in terms of money exchange. We already see Asia actually leading in that space, significant inroads into digital currency in places like China. But what is the implication actually of that? Well, the real thing about digital currency is that we actually start moving into a single messaging service. Because you think about today's transaction environment, it's two messages. One is basically a message to say, I will send you money. And then another message that will come later on to say, I have cleared and settled that promise. They're generally not confounded today. And so that's why you have delays in some of the transaction processing that you see, cross-border payments being relatively slow. But when you start actually going into digital currency, all of these activities are bundled into one. And so that becomes real-time money transfer between here in UK, for example, real-time money transfer between players when certain things activate. Once you achieve this real-time nature of money, making kind of transaction capability M0 overall across the system, imagine the possibilities of smart contracts and supply chain digitization. Because these are all friction points today. These are all things that, because of all the different protocols and systems we have, make things maybe move a bit slower. So Mastercard has one of the largest collections of patents of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency technology, not because we actually will issue it. This will all be issued by governments, but because we want to make sure that the endpoints are secure and accessible for the ecosystem players. All of that needs a great customer experience and design, so it's always around finding the right problem, and I shared a couple of them, that ultimately is being chased by the right solution. And so I cannot emphasize enough to say, like, and this is a really transformational thing for even Mastercard, to say, if you don't have good design alongside your innovation itself, it will likely not work. We've seen many great ideas die, but then we have seen many great ideas that are equal in nature succeed, mainly because they had great design. And so a wonderful example right now is that buy now, pay later is a wonderful topic. A lot of people, and we'll talk a little bit during the panel around that, are embracing that. Afterpay, Klarna, companies that are worth billions of dollars now. But what did they actually innovate? They innovated experience. Your credit card that was issued 50 years ago was already a buy now, pay later solution. But it did not fit the purpose of today's customer that does not want universal access to credit, but wants very specific access to credit when they have a specific purchase to make. And so it's a mindset shift to say like, well, actually it's already there. No, it is already there, but not in the personalized way that these buy now, pay laters are bringing it to market. So to kind of wrap up, how do we make all of this real? And you're invited when we start opening our office again. We have experience centers where we can have 90+ demos for people to play with, to understand how this technology may impact your own businesses. So you're all welcome to come and check out the future of commerce and payments, because it's really about the dialogue and finding consensus and having that conversation around the future. And then if you're interested in actually deploying technology, we also come to you. We have a labs as a service capability with over 430 engagements around the world that continuously innovates and integrates technology with our partners across the world. So that gives you a little bit of a backdrop. I know it didn't bring any fancy videos. I didn't bring any kind of technology that you can touch and feel, but I wanted to just give you a bit of an appreciation of what's happening behind the scenes. How do we create the new future of commerce and technology? And I always say, let's create something priceless together. So thanks for your attention, and it's great to see you all, and looking forward to more panel discussions.
Thank you, Tobias. Shall we give Tobias another round of applause, please? That was a fascinating presentation.